there is another fight that has been going on, which is the fight over Tucker Carlson. Now, this is actually a great interview, Dr. Rod, that you shared with me the other day. It had been on my watch list for a while. I finally got around to watching it. And there was so much in this. And guys, the link is down below. Russell Brand interviewed Tucker Carlson for like an hour or so. It was a great interview. I thought that there was a lot of really good things in it. But I was just trying to think, there's what out of that thing could I take as a lesson? Because there was lots of lessons that I learned, but I wanted to share this one line that he shared where we talk about fights, right? And we in leadership are constantly in a battle. We are always fighting. Now, one leader that is under the spotlight for the fight is Donald Trump. And it's really interesting when Russell Brand asked Tucker Carlson about Trump and what happened on January 6th at Capitol Hill. It was interesting that Tucker spoke very fondly of Trump, but then said this one statement: leaders shouldn't make people more angry. I'm censoring it because he says he didn't say a bad word, but let's just censor it for now. So I thought it was a really interesting take that he wasn't saying. Actually, his response to a lot of the questions were amazing. As always, the links are down in the description of all these articles. Go and watch it, etc. But Dr. Rod, his response to a lot of things was actually quite mature, I found. And this one where he was talking about January 6th, he kind of was very open to the fact that it wasn't Trump's fault, right? He was kind of like, look, it's not Trump's fault. However, as a leader, you shouldn't make people more riled up. And I just thought that's such a, like Jesus speaks about we need to be peacemakers, right? Like we as leaders, it's our responsibility to be peacemakers. And that's definitely not what Trump did on January 6th, although he didn't, I don't think he instigated it, but he didn't help it. And I thought it was a really interesting take that leaders shouldn't make people more angry. So when we're in fights, when we're in battles as leaders, we really shouldn't be trying to rile things up. We shouldn't be stoking the fire. We shouldn't look. I'll be completely honest. Like, I was late to our meeting this morning, or to this podcast today with you, Dr. Robbins. I was having a fight with my wife, right? And I must admit, I did exactly, now walking straight into this meeting, I did exactly what Tucker said not to do. You shouldn't make people more angry. I went into the conversation to poke. I wanted to emphasize a point, but while I was there, I poked a little bit and sparked a reaction, which I shouldn't have. And I immediately apologized and said, look, it wasn't the right approach. The facts are still the same, but I shouldn't have approached it in that way. And so, Dr. Rod, we as leaders are constantly in battles against competitors. There's battles in our teams within each other, like battles between our team and ourselves, but battles between our, fights between our team and other team members. How do we make sure that we don't contribute to the problem?
Oh, well, think before you speak. I think good leaders are always looking a bit down the track to try to figure out how their words, their actions are likely to impact the situation or the people involved. And look, I think President Trump did some pretty good things when he was in office. And, lists have been published. You can go online and find the lists of policies that he implemented. He was one of the very few presidents who actually did what he said he was going to do once he got in office, and you don't see that happen very often. And he obviously supported rather conservative approaches to many policy issues, which obviously a lot of people applauded. But he did have a weakness, I think, in that he didn't always think carefully about the consequences of what he might say. And I know, I'm not sure whether I've shared this with you on the podcast before, but in relation to things like January 6 was related to his statements about being robbed, that is, the election was stolen, and he was practically quoting from Hillary Clinton just a few years before. But that aside, he could have taken a different approach. He could have taken an approach. He could, for example, have set up an inquiry that could not have been shut down by the Biden administration to test the claims that were made. Now, look, I happen to believe that at the very least, there were statistical issues that ought to have been looked at. In other words, the statistics, particularly on voting patterns of people who were voting on the day and what was happening with mail-in votes and so on. There are enough statistical differences.
Anomalies.
Or anomalies, if you want to call them that I think warrant some investigation without making any particular accusations.
Yeah.
But look, honestly, the American voting system is open to all kinds of abuse. It's when you consider that, America is supposedly leader of the free world and innovative and so on, their systems of voting are archaic.
Yes.
And they're all over the place. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, because it's all state-based and different states do it different ways, have different rules and all sorts of things. You don't need to, or at least in that election, you didn't need identification. It's just ridiculous. We do have some of those same issues here in Australia too, where you don't have to prove you are who you say you are when you go to vote, and I think you should have to do that. But anyway, that all that aside, I think instead of taking what I would consider a wise and statesman-like approach, he tended to, as it were, shoot from the hip. So he said a lot of things and I doubt that he considered the consequences. I don't think he intended to start the unrest. I don't think he intended what his words appear to have generated. I don't think he intended that. And, of course, he tried to stop it. And then the reason why Tucker Carlson was asked about January 6, of course, was that he showed footage that apparently had been suppressed by the congressional committee that was looking into the January 6 incidents. They called it an insurrection, which is probably a misuse of the English language. Well, I think it is anyway. But anyway, who cares what I think? But the general lesson here is our words can stoke anger, and anger rarely leads to a good outcome. I think that's the important lesson.
Yeah,
anger rarely leads to a good outcome. So don't stir it up. And in any case, anger is not good for us as individuals. It doesn't do us any good. It sends us to an early grave.
And
so
also,
let's not get angry.
We need to be careful of our words and choose our words and know that they have an outcome. And we need to be peacemakers. But also, kind of what we spoke about last week about the perception that even if it was the CIA or the FBI or whoever it is they're saying that were like had plants in there, the secret agents that were actually instigating it and that led it, and it was all pre-planned, all that sort of stuff. Like okay, let's say that it had nothing to do with Trump. Let's pretend he said that, and he automatically then just put himself up to be blamed for it. But if he had have not said anything, then there's like that if we choose our words wisely, then we can't be held, our words can't be used against, well, there is less chance of our words being used against us. There's always a chance of our words being used against us. But how, it's a fine line, Dr. Rod, and we talk about this a lot. We talk about this challenge of standing up for what we believe. Like God has called us, God called us individually to different causes to stand up for. And so we need to know what we've been called to stand up for. But how do we know then, how do we stand up for something that Trump, like, because let's be honest, Trump believed that he was called to, what was the word? Expose,
drain the swamp.
Drain the swamp. That's
Yes.
it. Drain the swamp. And well, by him, kind of calling out this voter fraud, that was, like you say, there's issues that, like, yes, there was inconsistencies, but there have been, like, every time, and every single time you can see that there's been some form of impression of foul play or whatever in the voting or whatever. There's always, like, from one side or the other, both sides are guilty of it. But when we are standing up for what we're meant to be called, what we believe we're called for, how do we do that without inciting anger?
Well, look, I think you ought to be passionate about your purpose, passionate about what you believe, but I don't think passion is the same thing as anger.
Yeah.
Look, let me try and explain it this way. I have passion about values, attitudes, beliefs, ideas, methods, plans, strategies, those kinds of things. Anger is directed at people.
Yeah.
I think one of the major difference is anger usually is focused on an object, and usually that object is a person or a group.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Regrettably, we're seeing a lot of that in politics today, and I just don't think it's a good way to go. We've got to have passion as leaders, because if we don't, we won't feel like getting out of bed. Mm-hmm. Like both of us, when we were talking prior to this podcast, neither of us had more than 2 hours sleep last night, right? But we had passion about certain things that got us up out of bed.
Yeah.
And we're still going. Both of us will probably still be going by midnight tonight, because we both have pretty busy schedules today. That's just the way it is.
I still have a full days of work to do.
So you've got to have passion, because that gives you motivation and drive. And obviously we need also to manage ourselves. We can't work 14, 16, 18, 20-hour days on a regular basis, but sometimes you have to, and it's the passion that you have for your purpose and your values, attitudes, beliefs and plans and all those things. That's what keeps you going. You have to have that. Otherwise, you'll never be able to sustain your leadership. But that isn't the same thing as anger. Now, unfortunately, you've also got to educate the people around you that your passion isn't the same thing as anger. It becomes anger when you start pointing your finger at people and using words like, you don't understand, or you don't work hard enough, or you need to get in behind this vision.
Yeah.
So you need to remove that kind of language as much as possible as a leader.
So I agree with you, but then my mind goes to, there are some causes that make me angry. Like, so for example, when I hear someone share the story of them being used and abused and treated poorly by and experiencing poor leadership, which kind of goes to your point a little bit, because like we always say, we're on a mission to eradicate poor leadership, but that is actually more based on poor leadership as the behavior, not as the person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've always emphasised that you don't want to get rid of the leaders. You want to get
Yes.
rid of poor leadership. So you're not trying to rid the world of poor leaders. You're
Yes.
trying to rid the world of poor leadership. So the focus actually comes off the person as somebody who's created and loved by God, and the focus goes on to behaviours or attitudes or actions.
Yeah, because when someone shares with me that story, I get angry, and it really riles me up sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes it does when someone's actually been genuinely hurt. How would you differentiate that? Because I think, to your point, it's because it's about the situation, not about the person. I think that that's one thing that I've trained myself to do is over time is I've understood that it's not the person, it's the behavior. And so I get righteously angry about a situation, but I used to be angry at the person about it.
Yeah, no, you should try to train. Well, I mean, I think we've got to train ourselves not to do that. But you see, in your case, your passion is to rid the world of poor leadership. And so the reason why you react in the way in which you do when you see examples of poor leadership or even abusive leadership, and we all know that happens, and both of us have experienced it as a matter of fact, that can generate this very, very strong emotion. And if you allow that anger to fester, sooner or later you will direct it at an individual.
Yeah.
So I think what as a leader, as yourself as a leader, what you need to recognise is you're driven by a passion to rid the world of poor leadership. And that's why you react as you do when someone tells you about an instance that they've experienced of poor leadership or of abusive leadership.
Yeah. And I'm just going to quickly jump on, like I said, I'm not all that great at, there we go, the technology side. Look, I may as well, we're talking about our mission of eradicating poor leadership being the behavior, not the person. We believe we do, the best way to do that is through free leadership development, which we have a free leadership development program, faith-based leadership development program. Follow the link, take a snap of that, and go and check that out. Absolutely free. Go and check it out because we believe that is the way for us to be able to move forward as leaders in our mission to eradicate poor leadership. Hey, you've just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube with Leadership podcast. If you've liked that, give it a thumbs up. If you've got any thoughts of how it challenged or helped your leadership, put a comment below. And we'd be honored if you would consider subscribing for more leadership content. Also, make sure you check out the playlist for more episodes like this.